just keep accumulating ownership of the most important networks the world has ever seen, right? So, to me, it's easy. Bitcoin's number one, Ethereum's number two, and then there's a handful of other networks that are, vying out to be provable parts of the ecosystem.
I saw an interview yesterday that Mark Yusko did on the Altcoin Daily YouTube channel. And last night I started looking through Twitter and YouTube, and it seems like there's a lot of FUD going around right now. I haven't looked at Google Trends in a long time, but Bitcoin as a search term is currently at 41%, which is just about the lowest it's been over the last 12 months. It was at 40% for the week of August 6th to the 12th. So it's definitely very low. With all of that and the fact that there's a spot ETF on the horizon and the Bitcoin coming next year, in this clip they discuss the possibility of BlackRock manipulating the price of Bitcoin before the ETF approval. Then Mark goes through some numbers that point to a very large upward move in the price going into, but especially after, the ETF approval and the halving next year. Enjoy the clip.
Something's wrong, and I can't put my finger on it. And do you think it's something going on with Binance or Binance, depending on which part of the world you're from? Do you think it's some big person unloading? To your point about insiders buying and insiders selling, if your goal is to accumulate an asset, you actually don't go out and buy the asset and tell everybody you're buying. What the really smart investors have done over the years is they actually go out and short a little bit of the asset and then tell everybody how crappy the asset is in interviews and stuff, and then go buy it when the price goes down. So again, if you were somebody who was on the verge of being approved for an ETF and you were going to take massive share and you wanted to buy the asset cheap, and maybe you even wanted to put some of your own money in there too, you might be contributing to downward pressure in the short run. So yeah, I think there definitely could be a little bit of that. And so I would say it probably wasn't BlackRock or others buying that was pushing it up. It was, people looking at the FTX now being in the rearview mirror, and people getting back to fundamentals and saying, all the selling that was going to happen happened, and all of the liquidations from leverage happened, when they kind of put Binance in the corner. So I still think BlackRock's going to be the first one approved. When that's another question we can probably talk about, but I still think they're going to be the first one approved. And I still think somewhere, and this is the part that I'm struggling with, there's somebody or some buddies who are selling. And one of the challenges of Bitcoin in particular is it's pretty closely held, right? Not that much of the total market cap actually changes hands on a day-to-day basis. So the free float, so to speak, is pretty low relative to the overall market cap. And so the fact that somebody or somebody's are still selling, because again, for every buyer, there's a seller. I'm just not quite sure where that's coming from, because I would have thought most of the levered longs had already been liquidated, in margin calls a year ago.
In your opinion, how soon until we see a Bitcoin ETF? And let me also add, sooner than we all think, or farther than we all think?
Well, I think consensus is sometime next year before the halving. I think that's kind of consensus. There's a big day coming up in a month, October 16th and 17th, as I understand it. October 16th is the deadline to make a decision on Bitwise's, and October 17th is the day for BlackRock. As much as I would love for Bitwise to get approved, since we're investors in Bitwise, I don't think it's going to happen, unfortunately, sadly, because I don't think it's a fair process, shall we say, even though it's supposed to be, and it's not supposed to be a kingmaker. But I think it would be optically too big a deal for them to say, no Bitwise, but yes, the next day. So my guess is they push them both, but then they're going to have the same problem in 3 months. So I at some point, they're going to have to take the heat. If after all these other people, the Winklevoss twins were first to apply, they just stopped applying because, they kept getting rejected. And you've had plenty of other people. Kathy Wood, in theory was first in line, then Bitwise, then BlackRock, and she already got dinged again. And again, we're investors in 21 shares, so we think we're investors that are MUN, which is part of it, 21 shares. So I would have been happy with that one too, but that didn't happen. So I'm going to go with before consensus, because I don't think they'll wait all the way until next year. But I have no special insight on that. Larry didn't call me.
Yeah. Once a Bitcoin ETF does get approved, spot Bitcoin ETF, is that game over in a sense? Like, that's mass adoption for Bitcoin. What else is there?
It's certainly mass adoption. So for sure. So, and let's just do math. So Eric Balkunas had this great post. Look, the industry, the RIA industry, advisor industry controls about 30 trillion. And let's say 0.1%, buy an ETF, Bitcoin ETF. That's 30 billion. Well, 30 billion on 500 billion, that's not very much, but it's not 500 billion. Remember, it's probably 100-ish of the 500 that is the free float. So 30 on 100, that would move the price. Price would go up. But what if it's 1%? Forget 10 basis points. What if it's 1%? 300 on 100, then we get that parabolic spike we had in the last run when we went from 10 to 50. And that could definitely happen. Now, all of this is in relation to fair value. So fair value today, somewhere around 50K. That's based on the Metcalfe's law curve. We're below that, obviously. So we should accrete toward that fair value between now and the halving next year. The halving potentially doubles the fair value, because if the price doesn't rise, then the miners go out of business. That's probably not going to happen. So what has happened in history is fair value rises, price rises, and we get slow accretion to that. So now we're talking, could that see a parabolic move from 25 to 100? Sure. And do you blow right through fair value and go to overvalue? Probably. What precipitates all of that? Adoption. And if 300 billion, which is only 1%, starts flowing in, now the converse of that is there's 20 billion in GBTC that if GBTC doesn't get approved, and let's say BlackRock does, is all of that 20 billion going to liquidate? Probably. I mean, probably if you're paying 2% and you can go pay, I don't even know what BlackRock's charging, but call it 50 basis points. Maybe it's less, but call it 50 basis points. You're definitely selling GBTC and you're buying the ETF. So if only 10 basis points comes in, we got 30 billion in, we got 20 billion going out. Oh my God, the price could actually stagnate or God forbid, go down in the short run, because people would freak out because there wasn't this big rally after the approval. I think that would be temporary, because even if all of GBTC liquidates, which it probably will, that's only 20 bills. Whereas I do think the adoption is going to be 1, maybe even 2%. Now we're talking 300 to 600 billion. That's a big move up. So mass adoption for sure. How fast? That's another question.